Imagine the most unimaginative retelling of the Superman story. No, I'm not talking about Man of Steel. Put that aside. Other than that, imagine the most unimaginative Superman retelling. Or maybe better put, imagine the most unimaginative supervillain origin story. And you've got Brightburn. So as you probably know, the main premise behind Brightburn is the Superman story. An infant crashes on Earth in a spaceship, and a couple of parents who can't conceive a child, they adopt the child unknowingly to the rest of the larger public. And of course, the child develops superhuman powers. Only thing is, the child in Brightburn turns out to be one of the most evil bastards that ever walked the planet. Now, I said this film was unimaginative, and I'm going to get to that. But I can think of 3 other properties that dealt with young adults or children who had supernatural powers. I can think of Chronicle, which I thought was an okay film. I can think of The Omen, dating back to the 70s with Gregory Peck and Lee Remick. I can even go back to the 60s to the classic Twilight Zone series. One of the most iconic episodes was called It's a Good Life, starring Billy Mooney. You may remember him from Lost in Space, where he plays a kid who has godlike powers. What's really sad is, all 3 of those properties were, in my opinion, vastly more interesting than Brightburn, because they actually did something with the child with superhuman powers. They did something with that premise. And what's sad is the Twilight Zone episode that I mentioned, It's a Good Life, it was only 30 minutes long, let's say 28 minutes with commercials. And even that was far more engrossing than what I saw in Brightburn. Why is that? Well, let me tell you. As a comic book reader, the premise of this film is not really all that unique. Countless times in books where you have the innocent become gifted with powers, and it changes them. They become evil. They go the opposite route. They go to the dark side, if you will. It's nothing new. However, I don't think I've ever seen that done on screen outside of films like I already mentioned, the 3 that I already mentioned. Definitely, and here's the hitch, definitely I haven't seen it so closely tied to the Superman origin story, which is a part of American pop culture. Everyone knows that story. So my thing is, if you go to the effort to make your film so identifiable with Superman, almost to the point where some were surmising that it might be a parody, a horror parody of Superman, that's fine. But then wouldn't it make sense for your film, your horror film, to be something inventive or something worth watching? That if you're going to tie your wagon to Superman, why not go all the way? Basically, show me Superman in a horror film. Well, what this movie does great is they get the horror great. But because you have set it up where this is clearly Superman, then I can say honestly, this film is missing a lot of stuff that probably would have made it more entertaining. For example, it would have been nice if we had seen some scenes with this kid, as he's growing up, where the parents are actually interacting with him, so that we're more attuned to the bond between mother, father, and child before the child becomes a psychopath. They do give us a quick montage of this kid as an infant, and it plays out like it's home video. And what I did like about this sequence was, knowing that it's a horror film, knowing what I'm in store for, those scenes were kind of chilling, knowing what's in store for all parties involved. What this film chooses to do is rush through all of the nurturing parts, rush through all of the developmental parts, where we would see him grow from infant to young adulthood. And I suspect it's just because they wanted to get to the good parts. This movie is an hour and a half long, and had they decided to actually do something with this premise, it could have easily been a 2.5 hour film. But like I just said, they just wanted to get us to the good parts. Had they stuck more closely to the Superman origin, we would have seen Brandon Breyer, that's the name of the kid, we would have seen him manifest his powers much earlier. And that would have solved what I'm hearing is a major complaint amongst everyone that I've heard review this. And that is the mother, played by Elizabeth Banks, remains totally clueless and oblivious to the fact that her kid is a psychopath and basically needs his ass whooped, in a matter of speaking. Having little Brandon manifest his powers sooner, that would have done away with that problem that I'm seeing a lot of people complain about, because it would have been more obvious that Brandon does have some issues, and it's possible that he's strong enough to break another classmate's hand, and that it's possible that he could have lifted a truck into the sky and slammed it to the ground. Then you have the problem of, how do you write the story where the parents know that he's this superpowered being, and that why wouldn't they have tried to kill him or stop him earlier on? Well, that's why you hire good screenwriters. I'm sure there's a story there that would make that work. The movie is at times scary. They're good at setting a mood. They're good at making things tense. The camera takes forever circling around people that are in dark rooms, or people that are in dark living rooms, or looking around their house and things are quiet. And there are a lot of jump scares in this film. I'm not particularly fond of those. I'll put it this way. If your movie is good, I don't mind the jump scares. I still think the best horror films don't require jump scares, because you will scare me just by the mood you set, just by the concept, and just by the tone or the story itself. The Exorcist, very scary movie. There may be one jump scare in that, and it's a mild one, but it's one of the scariest films I've ever seen. But this movie decides that it just wants to take all of the cheap, tropey scares from B or C level horror films and use them and just put them on top of a Superman story. And it doesn't even fully grasp the Superman story, which, as I've said, would have probably made this a much better film. The performances are all good to serviceable. Elizabeth Banks, I can't remember the name of the father, but he played a small role in the US version of The Office. I believe he's the same actor who played Pam's boyfriend before she hooked up with Jim. The actor who plays the main character, Brandon Breyer, he's probably the best. As a child actor, he's someone to watch. He's very brooding. There's one scene, I will say this. There are some scenes that are creepy that I liked, and they kind of play off of what I was saying about the home movie aspect of seeing Brandon as an infant and a toddler. There's a scene where he's eating breakfast and his father's in the kitchen with him. Brandon's eating his eggs, and all of a sudden his father starts to hear what sounds like metal on metal, a metal on metal sound. And he looks up to his son, who's in a trance, and he discovers that his son has been chewing the fork. In the Superman mythos, that would be one of those quirky moments where we're like, oh, the birth of a hero. So cool. They successfully make those moments where he develops his powers, they make them scary. And I give the filmmakers credit for that. They don't do anything more with that. That's unplumbed territory that they could have gone into and stretched this hour-and-a-half movie out to another half hour, at least. But the story these filmmakers chose to tell in total is basically one step away from a Chucky film, one step away from your typical slasher film where the slasher is a kid, and that's so disappointing. I remember seeing the first trailer and I was like, well, wow, okay, this is something that I've seen in comic books quite a bit. I don't think I've ever seen it on the big screen where it plays so much to a superhero character that we all know and love. Well, maybe we don't all love Superman, but we all know him. Another thing that didn't work for me in this movie was the fact that Brandon, as he's discovering his powers, there's no real motivation for him to become evil. He undergoes some of the bullying that a lot of teenagers go through. But it's made clear in this film that really he becomes an evil kid because something just snaps in him, something that emanates from the spaceship that he came to Earth on. It's just like all of a sudden he's kind of a wimp. He's kind of like a Clark Kent. And then suddenly, boom, he's an evil kid. That lack of any development of him growing into becoming an evil character, as opposed to just having a flip switched, is yet another manifestation of the producers and the filmmakers saying, we just want to get to the good stuff. We got a horror movie here. We're going to base it on Superman. Let's just get to the good stuff. Now, earlier I talked about the character of the mom being a complaint that a lot of reviewers had because she was so oblivious. She didn't want to believe that her son is capable of anything wrong. She was making excuses for her kid. Well, okay, I get it, but in the character's defense, the first images we see are of the camera when we come on to a Fade Out of Black. The camera is resting on a bookshelf full of books about getting pregnant and about fertility. So it's made clear that they are having problems having a child, getting pregnant. They don't really explore that too much. And I think it would have been good if we had seen at least one more scene, maybe at a doctor's office or a hospital, where they get the news that they were not pregnant or they had a miscarriage or something like that. That would have had some emotional heft right at the beginning of the film. But okay, they didn't do that. However, my point is the fact that they were so trying to have a child and that they were desperate, and this spaceship comes out of the sky, I can kind of see where she would be more in denial than the typical parent. Now, maybe it's an allegory for parenting today being very shoddy, but I'm just going to say I can see that being believable in her character. Having said that, there's a scene, I can't remember the sequence of all the scenes, but there is a scene where she walks into the barn where the spaceship is being kept or hidden, and she sees where Brandon is floating in midair and twitching like he's having a spasm, and the spaceship is emanating rays of red light into him. Now, at that point, I'm on board. I'm like, okay, you should be getting the long rifle, getting the long gun, getting the knife, getting all the stabbing materials right then and there on this kid. You should be doing the Damien Thorn on this kid, okay, with the 3 daggers. From a technical standpoint, everything about this film felt cheap. Shoddy camera, well, I'm not going to say shoddy camera work, but I would say uninspired camera work. Horrible flat lighting. Nothing visually interesting other than maybe a couple of shots of the kid doing his thing, his superpower thing. For a $6 million budgeted film, I think it was budgeted $6 million. I could be wrong about that. There were some effective special effects. The gore was a little off the chain in some scenes. I'm not going to give anything away, but nothing that you couldn't handle if you're into the horror genre. Put it this way, if you've seen John Wick 3, I think you can handle this film. But yeah, it looks cheap. The dialogue is kind of corny. There's a scene where Brandon says to one of his counselors, and I think it's his aunt as well, something like, you don't want to do what you're about to do because it would be bad for you. Something corny like that. I'm like, oh, really? Okay. I will say one positive thing. I think I said the special effects were good. Some of the flying effects were decent. There's a scene where he shoots lasers out of his eyes. I assume it's heat vision. I'm not going to give it away what he's doing with it. We get a sense of that in the diner scene. And by the way, I want to say, if you've seen the trailers, you should be as upset with the marketing of this film as I was, in that basically, once you've seen all 3 trailers, you've seen the film. The only question is, how do they stop the kid? So you're not going to be surprised by much of anything in this film at all if you've seen those trailers. There are some gruesome, somewhat inspired, I hate to say that, but I'll say inspired because it is a horror film, inspired deaths that happen. Some deaths that are worthy of the horror genre. There's one death in this film that really did have some emotional impact. I don't want to spoil it. I want to leave something for you to be surprised by. It really is impactful. It happens towards the end. And that was something that was kind of chilling. It really was. It's a death that you think, will he really, or will he won't? Will he? Wow, okay, he's going there. All right, okay. And then the movie ends. However, I guess I would call this a complaint about the film as well, or something that compounded the disappointment or the letdown. And that is, there are a series of montages during the credit sequence in this movie where I'm thinking to myself, that is the movie that I really wanted to see. I could easily see those scenes being put in the last 45 minutes of this film after we go from the small aspect of this kid in Brightburn, Kansas, terrorizing a select few people that he has grudges against, leading into these scenes that we see that are just rolled off during the credit sequence. That should have been the last 45 minutes of this movie. And I'm like, wow, okay. Now, do they leave this film open to a sequel? I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but I'd say yeah. Not necessarily, well, I don't want to say anything more, but let's just say they do leave it open to a sequel. But there are indications that we may see more of Brandon's race if there is a sequel. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay, with that, I'm going to give this movie, I'm going to go with 1.5 reels. 1 reel would be poor. 2 reels is fair. So I'm giving it 1.5 because I'd say, I really don't know if you should go to the movies to see this. I'd watch it again on Netflix or HBO. But it's not really worth going to the theater to see. But if you got nothing better to do, check it out. Just seeing some of the Superman tropes in a horror film is entertaining. It's just such a shame they didn't do so much more with this movie. And with that, I give you the martini.